Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Bandwango current client webinar. You may still be logging on, so we'll give everyone just a second to enter into the room. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking a little bit about Google Analytics and what your analytics should be telling you, both about your Bandwango passport and about your website in general. So this webinar will be recorded and put on bandwango.com for all future reference. So if you're joining us from the recording, welcome. My name is Emily Harris. I'm the Director of Marketing Operations here at Bandwango, and I will be your guide today to talk through all things Google Analytics. Moving forward, if you have any questions about how your Google Analytics account is set up using Bandwango, please reach out to your client success manager and they will be happy to connect you to the right resource and make sure that you're logging all of that reporting data in a really great way. You'll also notice today in our webinar room, we've got a chat and a Q&A section. I'll be answering all of your questions at the end of this webinar. So I'll go through my deck, and if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A box. And at the end of the webinar, I will go through and answer any questions you may have. So thank you again for joining us. Looks like we've got a few of our attendees now. So we're going to go ahead and get things started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we'll jump right in. So one thing to know, all of the data in today's presentation has been whitewashed. So making sure we don't share any critical data points from anyone in particular. So some of these data points have been kind of pieced together from other things. Some of them are from bandwango.com, but I want to make sure everyone knows where to find this information. So I used Google Analytics structure so that you know exactly where to find this in your own account. So again, today is what your Google Analytics should be telling you. I'm Emily, and we're going to jump right in with some Did You Knows. First, I want to talk a little bit about how Google Analytics actually works, because I think we talk a lot about this platform, but very rarely do we kind of get into the nuts and bolts. So Google Analytics is a free tracking tool offered by Google, and it shows you how visitors use your website. And that's probably kind of a duh thing for most of you. But the thing that you probably don't know, because a lot of you maybe were not around at the inception of your Google Analytics account, is that the way that you start your Google Analytics account is by adding a JavaScript code to your website. So your website has a layer of JavaScript code in it that is allowing Google Analytics to populate that information in. And this is really kind of critical to know, because moving forward, as you start layering in more pieces of code on your website, it's really kind of essential that you know what Google Analytics is tracking for you, because as you add in more strings of code for Bandwango pixels, Facebook, arrival list, you can get to a point where maybe you're tracking things and double counting things on accident. So it's really important to know where these codes live in your website. The other thing to know about Google Analytics is when a user visits your website, Google Analytics drops a cookie about that user's into that user's browser. So cookies are super small little files that contain information about user activities, and they're totally invisible. Now that privacy has become a more prevalent part of everyone's online experience, you've probably noticed cookies more often, because these rules around cookies have changed quite a bit. So now at the bottom of your browser, you probably have to accept cookies from websites in order to visit them or in order to browse without that annoying little bar at the bottom. But what's interesting is that Google Analytics is actually a cookie. So in the same way that Facebook may be following you around the internet, Google Analytics is as well. And that's why they're able to capture so much rich data for you. So seeing the future here a little bit, everybody knows that cookies are changing, and that's why first-party data capture is more important than ever before. Cookies are disappearing. And Google has made it very, very clear that they're not going to replace them. In fact, one of the key things that their stakeholders have said are, cookies are problematic to privacy, and they're not going to have a replacement for them, which kind of begs the question, what is Google going to do? Because Google Analytics is kind of the most habitual cookie placer on the internet. This stat, 55% of all websites on the internet have Google Analytics. So this is obviously a huge revenue generation opportunity for Google Analytics, and it'll be interesting to see where they go from here. It also begs the question, what are the other 50% of the websites on the internet doing to track traffic? The alternative that people suspect Google to use is machine learning. So basically server-side or browser fingerprint opportunities. Google's been kind of vague in what they mean by machine learning, but we're going to talk about how GA4 has a few of those clues to what the future might look like at the end of this webinar. So what's interesting is that the cookie announcement was made by Google in January 2020. They announced they were no longer going to be supporting cookies in the next 2 years. And GA4 was rolled out in October 2020. So there's definitely something that's going to happen, but it's still a mystery. So I want to talk a little bit more about how this works with Bandwango. You, as a Bandwango client, have probably heard us talk about Google Tag Manager, plugging in those tags, triggers, and variables that then populate activity within your Google Analytics. So I want to break this down a little bit further. Essentially, information from one data source has to be shared through another data source in order to get to Google Analytics. So the way that this commonly works is data source one is your website or your Bandwango subdomain offer page where you're driving that traffic for signups. And then that is communicating with Google Tag Manager, which is saying, hey, on this website, when someone clicks this button, we need to make sure that we're tracking that. And those two systems working together then populate what's happening in Google Analytics. So Google Analytics doesn't know what to track in addition to those kind of typical metrics that are included in that JavaScript code that we talked about a few minutes ago, unless you tell your website using a tag or a pixel what needs to be populated into Google Analytics. So all of these things have to work together. Your website is not going to be able to determine everything on its own. So it's really important that you've got data sources connected to each other so that you're able to see everything that's happening on your website and not just page views. So let's talk a little bit about why your data points may differ. This is something that I talk to clients frequently about. Remember what we talked about earlier. Google Analytics is the ultimate website cookie. And because people can block cookies on their browser now, what you see in Google Analytics is not 100% of what's happening on your website. And this is really important because some of the data points that we track here at Bandwango are signups, checkouts, those really kind of critical data points for you. You're going to see about 90% of that activity in Google Analytics. Your Bandwango backend is always a source of truth for how many signups you are driving. Your Google Analytics should serve as a guide for what is happening on your website and the trends that you might be seeing with your consumers. So here is a true life example from one of our clients who shall remain nameless. They had 245 signups in their backend, but on their Google Analytics account, you'll see that they only had 231. So this is pretty typical. It tends to be off by about 10 signups-ish, about 10% of the traffic, we like to say. So this is something to know in the future. This is why you will never see 1000% of what's going on, but you will get a feel for what's happening in your website. So let's talk through some traditional metrics here. And I'll try to dig in deeper to tell you a little bit about the trends that you might be seeing for your Bandwango passes and other useful tips for looking at traffic on your website. So the first thing I want to start with is maybe like a cool tool that you might not know about. And this is really helpful if you're trying to look at maybe one specific page on your website as it relates to your entire website. So here you can see this is bandwango.com. And if you've been to bandwango.com recently, you know that there's a platform page, there's our team page where you can meet everyone who works with us. And then there's also a clients page, which lists out a handful of our current clients. So if you want to, on your site, see how a single page compares to your entire website traffic, for instance, if you've got a huge peak of traffic on a particular day and you're like, I wonder which web page drove that traffic, you can use these plot lines to determine whether or not the peak in traffic that you saw on April 16th is due to maybe your Bandwango Pass landing page going live. So this is just kind of another cool way that you can analyze the traffic on your website. So let's talk landing pages really quickly. Your Bandwango Passport landing page will populate in your site content section of your website, and you'll be able to analyze the success of this page as it relates to the rest of the pages on your website. So you can see here in this kind of fictional example how this Bandwango Passport landing page is doing when compared to these other landing pages on this fictional destination site. So you can see here that, landing page 1 and 2 likely have some kind of paid advertising driving to that page. And a really good indicator of that is their bounce rate. Bounce rate typically moves up as paid advertising is added to a page because you're expanding to an audience who may or may not be interested in reading that content. This is something that I talk a lot to clients about because it's really important for your Bandwango passport that you're driving people to your landing page who are already engaged with your brand. Those people are the likeliest to sign up for your passport. And if conversion is your key metric for your campaign, then bounce rate is a critical part of that. You should always look at your website's bounce rate in general and, maybe evaluate what paid media is going to these landing pages so that you can see, oh, hey, this landing page is driving a 89% bounce rate. Maybe our media is not doing so hot in that market. We should look at that, but especially as it pertains to Bandwango Passport landing pages, because you want to drive the most qualified traffic to those signups. And this client here is doing a pretty good job of that. You can see that their bounce rate is about 62%. That's in line with the average for Bandwango clients who have a free pass live on their site. Our typical bounce rate for free passes is somewhere between 30% all the way to 65%. So they're doing a pretty good job considering they have paid traffic driving to this page. The other thing to be cognizant of is your average time on site. So time on site is a really good marker of how successful your landing pages are at driving the kind of engagement that you're looking for here. So for Bandwango Passport pages, our typical time on site is somewhere around a minute 30. So you can see that this client is right in that zone. A minute 30 is the sweet spot for a Bandwango Passport landing page because the goal of our landing pages is always to drive conversions. So, our current clients know we don't put a ton of stuff on our landing pages. The goal is to get someone to see the venues that may be included in the passport and determine whether or not they want to sign up, click the button, go through that sign up process. There are other pages on your website which may be focused on driving higher time on site. So you can see in this example, this fictional client's dining page has a 6-minute time on site. That's great. If they're really trying to get people to learn about their dining scene, then they're doing a good job at driving those qualified people to a page where they can really engage in that content. If you ever see your time on site for your Bandwango Passport landing page drive into the 6-minute range and you haven't done anything special to include, blogs on it or maybe a crowd riff module, that is a huge red flag. And you should let your client success manager know about that so that they can get to the bottom of why that may be happening on your page. We want people to make decisions quickly to some degree, because that allows us to know that our landing pages are doing their job at communicating the value of a passport. Okay, so the next thing that we are tracking on all of our clients' landing pages are our goals. So goals are something that we add into a client's Google Analytics as we launch a passport. And goals are maybe something that you don't always use for the rest of your site. And I know a lot of people will set a goal and sometimes forget it. So we're going to talk about this really quickly. In your Google Analytics dropdown, you can find your goals by going to conversions, goal. There are a few different views here, but I like to look at overview. And you'll see this screen when you come to overview. And the thing that I recommend is that you select your goal from the drop-down menu, right where it says select goal from this drop. So you should be able to find your goal from that drop-down menu. And when you select it, it should populate this view for you, which we see on the screen here, of how your goal is tracking day to day, month to month, but then also how many completions, total signups you're getting, which is usually the reference point for our goals, or purchases for our paid pass clients. And then also the goal conversion rate. Conversion rate is one of the most critical things that you can track for your website, because it evaluates how successful you're being at having those past signups or purchases happen on your landing page. This conversion rate should be pretty steady. And if it's not, then you know that maybe your website linking strategy is not doing you any favors, or perhaps you've got a show your badge passport. Show your badge passports are going to have peaks and valleys as conventions come into town. So those are the only two things that should make your conversion rate dip or climb. If your linking strategy is not consistent and people cannot regularly find your page in order to sign up, and the only thing driving traffic to that page is paid media, that's when you're going to see huge peaks and valleys in your conversion rate. So your conversion rate is a great overall evaluation of your website's health as it relates to your passport landing page. So something to keep in mind here, a goal conversion rate for a Bandwango passport page is, for paid pass clients, somewhere between 2 to 3%, which is the overall average for retail and e-commerce space. And then for our free pass clients, the goal conversion rate should be somewhere between 3 to 9% on maybe some of our savings pass initiatives, which are focused on evergreen content. And for more engaged passports like gamified passes or, short-term passports like restaurant months, your conversion rate is likely to fall somewhere between 9 to 14%. So this client's doing an excellent job at driving this 15% conversion rate goal. Keep up the good work. Nameless, faceless client. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Bandwango data points within Google Analytics. So these are the key things that you should know if you've got a passport live right now. So we get asked a lot, where can we find Bandwango data within our Google Analytics? The easiest way to find this information is actually within, I think, your events report, which you can find under behavior, events. There are a few different ways you can look at these, but I prefer top events because it gives you these 3 different dimensions you can filter by. We're looking at event category within this screen, but you can also look at event action, which will populate purchases, add to carts, outbound link clicks, or event label. So if you are tracking other things on your website and they're labeled maybe, crowd riff module, your cocktail pass, you can see that in the label. So filter these however it makes sense for you. Maybe play around so that you can see these different options, but I like to start in category and then narrow it down from there. So category here is Bandwango, obviously. And then in our next view, we're going to look into category to see these different actions that are taking place within the Bandwango event. So here you can see that in our top events, we've got outbound link click, checkout, add to cart, button click, purchase, and add to cart. Something to know for all of our free pass clients out there, because we skip add to cart function for free pass signups, add to cart is kind of a tricky metric in Google Analytics for you. You're going to see things sometimes fire or not fire depending on how quickly our system is able to skip that add to cart function. So you should be looking at checkout as your add to cart. Checkout fires when the form slides out from the right side of the page or appears when someone clicks that add to cart button. So checkout is kind of your true add to cart functionality if you've got a free passport. For our paid passport clients, you will see all of these things populate exactly how you think they would. Add to cart button click when someone selects how many items they want to add to their cart, and then checkout when that form appears so that they can input their payment information. So the two key ones that we really focus on here are checkout and purchase, since we're talking in this example about a free pass client. So you can look at checkout to see how many people are seeing that form slide out and then deciding not to sign up for my passport. Same thing for add to cart for our paid pass clients. If you're seeing that you have a huge amount of drop off when checkout or add to cart happens, it's probably because people are intimidated by the price that they see. So those are things to know about those two kind of metrics here. For your checkout, we're really in a good range here with this example client. Only a handful of people are seeing that form slide out for the first party data that they have to submit and deciding, you know what, I'm not comfortable submitting this information. That's going to be some people's journey, and there's nothing that we can do about that. So we just want to make sure that there's not a huge gap between checkout and purchase here. And in this case, there's not. So we're doing a great job at driving that really qualified traffic. That's the other thing to think here. If you're seeing that a ton of people are having that form slide out and they're deciding, oh, no, never mind, I do not want to sign up for this. Clearly, they didn't understand that this is something they had to sign up for. Same thing for your add to cart. If you're seeing a huge disparity between add to cart and checkout and purchase, it's likely because you've not communicated the price of this item prior to someone being able to go through this process. So that's why it's very important that you have specificity in your ads, because otherwise you're really going to see these metrics do some crazy dips. So, one cool thing that I encourage all of our clients to do is look at where your sources and acquisition is coming from. So, for example, this is a look at our purchase events that we're firing on this page. So, this is everybody, or mostly everyone, who has signed up for a Bandwango passport. And you can see where they have come from in this source acquisition. So this GIF is to show you guys how you can go through this filtering. We're going to talk about filtering a little bit more on the next slide. So filtering by source medium. This is really cool, and we'll talk about why a little bit later when we talk about GA4, but source medium is great to analyze which paid traffic points or earned media points are most successful at driving those signups. So cookies read where this traffic comes from, and that's how source medium populates. So where you're seeing Google CPC, direct traffic, that is your Google Analytics reading where people are coming from. Direct traffic is traffic that comes from your website. So these are people who maybe typed in your URL and got to that page, maybe from an ad that mentioned your URL. And this is super helpful because this is where our referral exclusions come in handy. If you are seeing your website, so say your www.visitwaco.com, if you're seeing that come up as a referral in your source medium, that means that you do not have your website as a excluded referral. This is really important just because you want to understand all of the traffic that's coming directly from your website and be able to filter this in a way that's effective. So make sure you're adding those referral exclusions for any websites that you consider your own. Bandwango passports and your subdomain page is added as a referral exclusion. And this is also where your UTM codes are read in Google Analytics. So here you can see in our source medium, we've got our QR code poster populating as the source medium for some of these past signups, which is exactly what we want to see. We'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. The other thing that you'll see in your source medium is abbreviations in front of Facebook marking their different traffic sources. To be honest, this is kind of a pain and it can really clog up your source medium filtering, but it is kind of nice to know where the majority of this traffic is coming from. For this client, we were filtering again by those signups. So you can see that the most amount of their signups were coming straight from their website. And the second most amount of signups were actually coming from mobile users on Facebook. So that's kind of something cool. If you've ever seen these in your source medium and you want to understand them a little bit better, you can always Google what does m.facebook.com mean in Google Analytics, and it'll tell you what that abbreviation means. Here are a handful of the most common ones that we see. So we saw that QR codes on posters drove a lot of signups for this past client. QR codes, interestingly enough, work by becoming a visual version of the URL. So if you've ever wondered how it works, it's basically, an image that equals the URL. And that's why it's so important that if you are putting QR codes on anything, that you make sure to assign a UTM code to them. Because what happens then is when someone scans this in your Google Analytics, you're able to track how many scans are coming from each of these things. So for Bandwango clients, it's really important because on your posters, rack cards, window clings, we're able to tell how many signups or purchases are coming from these materials. And that will give you a better grip moving forward of whether or not you want to purchase this kind of collateral and print it and distribute it. This is really important for other campaigns outside of Bandwango as well. If you're printing something for collateral, put a QR code on there and make sure you understand how that QR code is tracking. If you are still placing magazine ads, print ads, visitor guide ads for anything, that URL should have a QR code because you want to understand where your money is going to and how effective that placement is. So if you've not built a UTM code, this is the source that I go to build our UTM codes for our clients. This is Google Analytics Campaign URL Builder. It's really simple to build these. You pop in your website URL, and then remember we talked about source medium earlier. This is how Google Analytics is reading that data. So you put in the source that you want to see and the medium that you want to see. For our clients, I will usually put QR code as the source and the campaign medium as the type of collateral we're creating. So for you guys out there who are thinking about using QR codes for your paid advertising campaigns, you might want to put the source as magazine article 1, and then your medium as travel and leisure magazine. And then your campaign name is an additional thing that you can sort by in the same section that you sort by source medium. So this is something that populates in a different drop down on Google Analytics. So you'll see at the very bottom, that's the generated campaign URL. That's what you can plug into those QR codes on any QR code generator in order to make sure that your Google Analytics is populating this data. So switching gears to kind of a higher level again, we also turn on enhanced e-commerce functionality for all Bandwango clients. What this does is allow you to configure shopping behavior reports. So for paid pass clients, this is really important. If you want to see where people are dropping off from that add to cart, checkout, purchase point, one of the coolest reports, in my opinion, is actually the sales performance report, because you will see here that this is populating a transaction ID. These transaction IDs actually correspond to order IDs in Bandwango's backend. So I've blocked this out just for privacy's sake. Nobody's going to know who these transaction IDs are, but in your report, you'll be able to see the full transaction ID. And the way that I encourage our clients to use this is in their Bandwango backend, you'll see that we've got, this is our test order site here. So this is no one's actual passport, but this test order has this order ID, whoops, corresponding to it. So if an order comes through from maybe one of your target markets, say that you are Visit Houston and you know that you've got an ad live in market, you're trying to drive more visitors from San Antonio. If you see an order from San Antonio come through and you're like, oh, I wonder how this order found us, you can search by this order ID in your enhanced e-commerce sales performance report and then filter that acquisition to determine where those people are coming from. This is a super granular approach. You can only use it on these kind of one-off purchases or signups, but it's a really cool feature if you are looking to target or get into new market segments, because you can determine whether or not those market segments are finding you in the way that you think they are. So here's that kind of final example of this report, sourced, filtered by source medium. You can see all of these different order IDs sourced by where they're coming from. So a bunch of these guys came from our QR code and our poster, and then the only person who's searching anything on yahoo.com apparently also signed up for a Bandwango passport. So this is a cool way that you can get super granular on your target audiences or your target demographics. So rounding out our call here, we're going to talk about the GA4 rollout and what that means for everyone who uses Google Analytics. So there are some really cool features that we're looking forward to using here at Bandwango. We are working on GA4 rollouts right now with a handful of clients, but if you are working to configure your GA4 account and you're a Bandwango client right now, let your client success manager know so that we can start helping you configure those things for your account. GA4 is going to change a lot of things, and we want to make sure all of you who are working on that transition are prepared to track Bandwango data there. So GA4, although it's a shift from how you currently use Google Analytics, will have some really cool features. It's important that everyone knows GA4 will just not happen to you. You have got to actively seek out GA4. And what that means is you have to set up new tracking, you have to establish that new view in your Google Analytics. There are some things that you have to do in order to set that system up. If you're curious about that after watching this video, feel free to reach out to me and we can talk about it together. So cool new features. One of the things that we talked about early into this call was Google setting up more machine learning. And this is kind of the GA4, information overload. GA4 is going to start automatically detecting trends in your data and alerting you to it. So the goal of this is that Google Analytics is going to try to take out a little bit of the guesswork that you might have had to do otherwise. So if they see that one of your bounce rates for your page is going bananas, they will alert you to that and say, maybe it's because the top source for this is this digital banner. So that's one really cool thing that will hopefully take a little bit of work off your plate and a little bit of guesswork out of Google Analytics. The other thing that it's going to be able to do is actually predict revenue from a certain group. So the really interesting thing about this, particularly for paid pass clients, is now in GA4, you can create audiences and run analysis on them. So you can say, all of these people, upon their first visit to the website, decided to purchase something for us. Let's try to get more of these people to perform actions this quickly. What you can do is load that audience data into GA4. You can tell them, I want to segment out all of the people who performed this action. And then GA4 can predict that revenue from a certain group and say, these are the people who are likeliest to purchase more, faster, and make your life just a little bit easier. So this is going to be really relevant for paid pass clients moving forward, and something that we're working on configuring in GA4 here at Bandwango. You can also use the data from GA4 to start building custom audiences in Google Ads. So all you DIY DMOs out there who build, market, and push your own campaigns live, this is going to be a super, super cool feature for you. And it's going to allow you to really use the people in Google Analytics to your advantage. So these custom audiences that you can build are going to be a really good way that you can kind of seamlessly have your Google Ads run to those who are most qualified. And this is going to make a difference for Bandwango Passport ads as well, because as you've heard me say before, those engaged audiences are the likeliest to convert. So if we've already got an amazing custom audience in GA4, when you release a Bandwango Passport, we're going to be able to say, this is the audience who it should go out to first. So that's a cool thing coming if you use Google Ads or if your agency uses Google Ads. You'll also be able to establish this conversion tracking for YouTube, which is something that has not been able to happen yet. So if you are a client who is looking to test the YouTube space, get into marketing your paid passports in YouTube, then this might be a really cool feature for you as well, and maybe connect a few of the dots that your organization has been missing. The other thing that I'm excited about, but is maybe more of a bummer for some of our destination clients, is you will have less views available in GA4. What this view is if you've ever decided, you know what, I only want to see traffic to this particular part of my website. I only want to calculate all of the traffic coming from maybe my weddings website. If that is something that is active right now in Google Analytics, you'll have fewer opportunities to do that in GA4, because what Google Analytics has discovered is that people actually see better information when they use filters effectively versus adding those, 13 views. It also gets really confusing because if you are tracking, maybe Bandwango Pass information like goals, those views, we only establish a goal for your primary view. So if you're adding all of these views and we don't know about it, your goal may not be set up in all of those views, which can be really frustrating for you. So less views to me means, fewer frustrations for clients, but it may mean that for your team, you're going to have to pivot the way that you typically see this reported information. So the other thing that's really interesting is there's less focus on channel groupings in Google Analytics 4. And what this means is if you think back to our kind of source medium discussion here, channel groupings are, previously were able to be customized to fit a client's needs. So for instance, if you didn't like the way that all of that Facebook data broke out, you could create a custom channel grouping for yourself so that you could see simply all of your Facebook traffic in one area. In GA4, there's less of an emphasis on channel groupings and more of an emphasis on source medium, which tells us that GA4 is going to get even probably more sophisticated than Google Analytics at tracking where people are coming from. This also begs the question, how are they going to do that without cookies? But That's still a mystery to us. So what's interesting is that it's going to become even more important moving forward that your campaigns use UTM codes. I cannot stress this enough. This is probably the most important thing that you can do in order to see data in Google Analytics. Use those UTM codes, and moving forward, it's going to become essential that you do. The other thing that's really interesting about GA4 is that all of your hits are going to become events. So previously in event tracking, you could only track events if they had, some kind of previously identified code or action related to them. In GA4, this becomes less specific, so that now what you can do is see all of your events that are happening on your website, start marking them as conversions if you want that to be a conversion point and optimize towards that on your website. So how this relates to Bandwango passes is moving forward, all of your past signups will become events that are tracked here, and all of your add to cart button clicks can also become these events. Same thing for checkout, outbound link click. Some clients feel that this is an easier way to see it than the current event setup that we looked at before. It really kind of depends on your preference. I have gotten so used to seeing events come through a certain way that I kind of like it the old way, but this will hopefully improve things for some of you who found that view a little cumbersome or, problematic. So this is really interesting, something that we're working on optimizing with our current GA4 clients so that as we start to roll this out with additional clients, these events are super easily tracked across your Bandwango platform, and you're able to see those conversion events more clearly than ever. The last thing about GA4 that's really interesting is that you're going to be able to create custom reports that are maybe more easily distilled for your key stakeholders. So you can see that there are different types here. Funnel analysis, maybe for evaluating how many people are going through, adding something to their cart, checking out, actually purchasing it, but also for page views. Maybe you want to determine how many people are going to this page and then moving through these other events on our site, like maybe visitor guide requests. There are also, cohort analysis, so insights you can get from those specific user groups over time. And then intersections, segment overlaps. What do the intersections of consumer behavior on your site tell you about your product? I'm really interested in seeing how certain page views for our clients, like itineraries and listings, overlap with signups and purchases. We know that a lot of purchases and signups happen from listing pages. Let's get that into a great report so that we can show our members who are members of our DMOs, how important their listing pages are, or maybe why they should invest in an upgraded listing on your website. So all of these tools and reports are going to become available in GA4, and we're really excited about populating Bandwango information into these so that it's more easily distilled in your stakeholder reports. So that brings me to the end of my deck. I saved a few minutes for questions here, so I am going to stop sharing my screen and come back to our room so that we can see if we've got any questions, any chats that have come through. If you've been waiting for this point to submit your question, feel free to do that now. Hopefully you got a lot out of this webinar. I'm always available to chat and look through those super specific GA reports if you want kind of a one-on-one meeting. Those things are available through our service. So if you're looking for a way to distill this data, identify these trends within your website, I'm happy to set up a call and go through this report with you. And that goes for anyone who is watching this recording on bandwango.com. You don't have to be live to ask for that. So please reach out if you do want that kind of one-on-one approach. I'm happy to answer those questions anytime. So looks like I did such a good job that no Q&A came through. That's great. Thank you again so much, all of you, for joining today's webinar. I hope that you got something out of it. And if not, if you want a more custom approach, then please reach out after this call. You can find me at emily@bandwango.com so that we can get your questions answered and get you a super specific, focused view on what's happening on your website. So again, thank you so much. This is the end of our webinar. Please join us next time for our next current client view.